And that does it. The first presidential debate of the 2016 race, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, round one. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Tonight's debate, as you heard, took place at Hofstra University on Long Island. It was moderated by NBC News' Lester Holt. Third-party candidates, including Libertarian Gary Johnson and the Green Party's Jill Stein, were excluded under stringent rules set by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is controlled by the Democratic and Republican parties. Just before we began the special tonight, just before 8:30 in the evening, Eastern Standard Time, police arrested 17 activists at Hofstra who were protesting the exclusion of the third-party candidates from the debate. Earlier in the day, Green Party candidate Jill Stein was stopped by Hofstra security and Nassau County Police and escorted off the campus, even though she was on her way to do an interview with MSNBC. Well, Jill Stein will be joining us tomorrow morning here in our studio in New York City for a 2-hour Expanding the Debate special. We will re-air tonight's debate between Clinton and Trump and give Stein a chance to respond to the same questions at her own podium. We did invite Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson, but he said he wouldn't be able to make it. But now, for the next 50 minutes, we're going to talk more about tonight's debate. We are joined now by 6 guests. Eddie Glaude is still with us, chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, author of the new book, Democracy in Black: How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul. Alan Nairn is with us as well, longtime award-winning investigative journalist and activist. Ramzi Qasim is a professor of law at the City University of New York School of Law, an attorney for many men held at Guantanamo. He's been to Guantanamo more than 50 times. He's also head of the Immigrant and Non-Citizen Rights Clinic at CUNY Law School, as well as CLEAR, which is a clinic called Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility. Arlie Russell Hochschild has just joined us at the table here in New York. She is author of Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right, brand new book. Joining us from Seattle is the Seattle City Council member, Kshama Sawant. And with us in Tucson, Arizona still, from right there on the border with Mexico, immigrant rights attorney Isabel Garcia, co-chair of the Coalition for Human Rights. We welcome you all to the table. Well, why don't we go to one of our new guests, Kshama Sawant. You've been listening to this whole debate. What's your response?
I thought a number of important points were made, and I'm happy to see that some of the real issues were discussed about living standards, but very, very minimally. And I am also glad that Trump was defeated on some of the important points. And I actually believe that it would be best for our nation if Trump is trounced in the election, and I'm hoping that that happens. But I think the most important point that is missing from tonight's debate is exactly what you said, Amy, which is that the voices that are speaking to the majority of the population today, the America that is left out of these debates, the America that is especially crying out for a real change away from corporate politics, that voice was entirely missing. You mentioned Jill Stein was not allowed in the debates. Not only that, but several of the protesters outside were arrested. So we're seeing that a lot of what you hear, a lot of what 100 million viewers listened to and watched was a very, very controlled debate between the Republican Party establishment and the Democratic Party establishment. And what we're seeing is two candidates who, admittedly, there is a fundamental difference between Trump and Clinton, and I am as horrified as any other progressive in this nation by Trump's agenda. The fact that he emphasized the stop and frisk policy is just stomach-turning to me. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is two of the least popular candidates in the history of recent presidential debates being confronted with each other when the real issues are completely off the table. And that is why I think we have to remember that at the end of the day, we're going to be pushed into this discussion between Trump and Clinton for the next several weeks, the next 6 weeks. And the real questions are, how are we going to build the left in America? How are we going to not only defeat Trump, but the right-wing agenda? How are we going to make sure that the wealthiest country in the history of humanity can be such that it actually works for the enormous numbers of working people? And Tulsa and Charlotte were mentioned today, but no real answers as to how the question of racist policing and the fact that many of the cities in which this racism and police violence is taking place are either Republican mayors or Democratic mayors, and there's no real answer as to how an actual civilian oversight to policing will be achieved. So I think that if we are going to have a real discussion of what America needs, that is what we want to talk about. And I would also mention, there is such, despite the fact that there is a potential for the first woman president to be elected in the history of the United States, less than half of women voters say that they're excited about Clinton's campaign. And what we're seeing is that no more than 12% of likely voters who are going to vote for Clinton are excited about the prospect of her winning, and no more than 11% of the voters who say they're going to vote for Trump are excited about his candidacy and his potential victory. So what we're seeing is that despite very clear differences between Clinton and Trump, the real question is, how are we going to build the left, and how are we going to pose a challenge to both the Democratic and Republican Party establishments, which ultimately serve the agenda of Wall Street? How are we going to really talk about living wage jobs for a majority of the population? And Trump talked about NAFTA, but we have to make sure we understand this is a multi-billionaire. The points about NAFTA are absolutely right. They did decimate jobs in the heartland of America, but we have to be clear. This is a disingenuous and obfuscating argument made by Trump, because neither Clinton nor Trump offer an answer to the Wall Street dominated and corporate dominated agenda of the TPP. And so if the labor movement really wants to fight it, then we need to bring forward a left alternative. And that is why, without talking about Jill Stein's candidacy and the potential for her to win a serious number of votes so that we can use that to build a basis for an independent party for the 99%, this debate is sorely incomplete.
You talked about how this plays out in the heartland of this country. We're also joined at the table by Arlie Russell Hochschild, who is author of Strangers in Their Own Land. You have spent years now. Talk about where you've traveled and what you think Donald Trump was appealing to tonight, and if you think he succeeded in doing what he set out to do.
Great question, Amy. I've spent the last 5 years in the hinterlands of Louisiana, which is the super South, and that's where the right has grown the most. I've been among whites. That's where the right has grown the most. Among older whites and evangelical Christians, that's where the right has been the most. I've tried to go to the heartland of a way of thinking, turn actually my political alarm system off and really try and listen and climb an empathy wall to see how does this make sense, this different worldview, different to me. And I listened to Donald Trump tonight with an ear to the appeal that he is making. And it's very different from the appeal that Hillary is making, completely different. He's appealing to a sense of loss, of discouragement. America's in shambles. Our infrastructure is destroyed. We're being humiliated by the Chinese. So a down. It's like a preacher. We are so lost and so down, but I will lift you up. It's like a secular rapture, and that is, I think, a very deep, important appeal. To being shamed, we have been shamed by others, and I will proudly stand forward with my masculine virtues. And I think he's the outsider. He's appealing to being not good, not having the skill set. His skill set's the one that is appealed. I could hear actually checking off certain appeals. Yes, we want an outsider. We don't care if he doesn't know how to do what Hillary knows how to do. He knows how to do what he has to do. And the rich will lift us up. There is a belief that the rich are the givers and the poor are the takers, that the private sector is the giver and the government is the taker. It's a reversal of assumptions progressives make. So there was an appeal to that, and even appeal to being a victim. Like, you know, the media is on her side. So I think that was the character of his covert appeal. And Hillary, you know, is appealing to being the grown-up, the responsible one, who, you know, in a pinch could really solve the problems. And that is a very different kind of appeal.
Mm. According to ABC News, the highest moment of the debate, the top social moment on Facebook, was when Donald Trump said, "I have much better judgment than she does. I also have much better temperament." Well, rather than me say it, why don't we go to Donald Trump saying it?
My question was, why is your judgment any different than Mrs. Clinton?
Well, I have much better judgment than she does. There's no question about that. I also have a much better temperament than she has. You know, I have a much better. She spent, let me tell you, she spent hundreds of millions of dollars on an advertising. You know, they get Madison Avenue into a room, they put names. Oh, temperament, let's go after. I think my strongest asset, maybe by far, is my temperament. I have a winning temperament. I know how to win. She does not know how to win.
Clinton.
Wait. The AFL-CIO the other day, behind the blue screen, I don't know who you were talking to, Secretary Clinton, but you were totally out of control. I said, there's a person with a temperament that's got a problem.
Secretary Clinton.
Woo, okay.
So there you have the top social moment. Arlie, what did he say to you?
He said, I'm in command, and she's just a woman with a flighty personality. There is a lot of gender story in this. For him to talk about her look, she had the wrong look. She's too short. She's, you know, doesn't look like a man. And here she's had, or have the stamina. Yeah. So he's, and he did that with her health thing. Oh, well, she's frail, can't take it. So he's, that's what he's doing here. He's claiming a male temperament.
I want to go to the NAFTA clip, and this one begins with Hillary Clinton.
I know how to really work to get new jobs and to get exports that help to create more new jobs.
Well, you haven't done it in 30 years or 26 years.
Well, I've been a senator,
You haven't done it.
And
you haven't
I
done
have
it.
been a Secretary of State, and I have
Your husband signed NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened to the manufacturing industry.
That is your opinion.
You go to New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate. But you know that if you did win, you would approve that, and that will be almost as bad as NAFTA. Nothing will ever top NAFTA.
That is just not accurate. I was against it once it was finally negotiated and the terms were laid out. I wrote about that in...
You called it the gold standard.
Well, I hope...
You called it the gold standard of trade deals. You said it's the finest deal you've ever seen.
No.
And then you heard what I said about it, and all of a sudden you were against it.
Well, Donald, I know you live in your own reality, but that is not the facts. The facts are, I did say I hoped it would be a good deal, but when it was negotiated, which I was not responsible for, I concluded it wasn't. I wrote about that.
So is it President Obama's fault? Is it President Obama's fault?
Even announced. Look, there are
Secretary, is it President Obama's fault?
There are
because he's pushing it.
There are different views about what's good for our country, our economy, and our leadership in the world. And I think it's important to look at what we need to do to get the economy going again. That's why I said new jobs with rising incomes, investments, not in more tax cuts that would add $5 trillion to the debt.
But you have no plan.
Oh, I do.
Secretary,
in fact,
you have no plan.
So there you have the discussion of NAFTA. Alan Nairn, who do you think won the debate overall and this point?
Well, on this point, Bernie Sanders would have crushed Trump on trade. He would have crushed him overall. Trump is appealing to the worst instincts of whites, luring them on racism. But that's not the be-all and end-all. Sanders had an economic program that could, in significant part, overcome that. Clinton doesn't have that. In this case, I think Trump crushed her on trade. Clinton was basically making the argument there of a Romney Republican. She was refusing to repudiate NAFTA. She was refusing to fault Obama on TPP. Later, she said "Me Too" on cutting regulations. It's pathetic. She's letting the nation down because she's opening the door to this fascist. I think, if the viewers noticed toward the end there, Trump started talking about Rosie O'Donnell. He started saying Rosie O'Donnell deserved it. And this actually gets to something extremely important and dangerous about Trump. A lot of people think, well, he's not that dangerous because he's ridiculous. It's just the opposite. I've spent many, many years confronting, dealing with, fighting against fascists, mass murderers who are supported by the U.S. government in many countries around the world. People like Salvador Alarcón and Sandoval Alarcón in Guatemala, D'Aubuisson in El Salvador, Rios Montt in Guatemala, Prabowo in Indonesia. And among them, these guys killed hundreds of thousands of people. So on a certain level, it's unfair to compare them to Trump, because Trump is a lightweight by comparison. But one thing about a lot of these fascist types is that they had trouble getting popular support because they were so scary, because they were such frightening figures. I mean, when I talked to them, you could see it in their eyes, and people could see it in their eyes. Few of them could stand up and hope to win an actual election. But some of them have the gift of, in addition to the authoritarianism and the willingness to kill en masse, the gift of being a clown, of being ridiculous. Someone like Duterte in the Philippines has that. He just won on a death squad platform. He promised mass death squad killings across the country. He won overwhelmingly. He's carrying it out. He's already killed thousands. And he has a very high approval rating. Trump seems so ridiculous that people kind of say, well, what harm could he do? That was, not to go too far with the comparison, but that was a factor with Hitler. That was one reason why until it was too late, Hitler was not taken seriously as a threat, notably by many on the left in Germany who failed to stand up to him early enough. And he also lulled in many in the establishment, many among the rich and the military, who thought, well, they could manage him. The establishment will prevail in the end. Trump's clownishness is in a way of strength because it diverts attention from the noxious things he's talking about. I mean, for example, they were talking about the New York bombing the other day. Under the proposal that Trump has put on the table, that man's family would all be executed, because he's called for the execution of terrorists. Also, if you took him seriously, and Trump always gets the break of people not taking him seriously, Clinton and Obama would also be executed because he said they're the founders of ISIS. And it's the U.S. policy, Obama policy, to drone ISIS people and any others the U.S. suspects, and many people who they don't even know who they are, but they're young men of military age, kill them from the sky. Trump is talking about dangerous things, but he skates because a lot of people say, well, that's Trump, it's funny.
Professor Glaude, can you follow up on the point about NAFTA and the economic populism, and then we're going to move on to Stockholm first.
I think what we saw in this debate is a clear difference between Trump and Hillary Clinton. But it wasn't a difference that called into question the fundamentals of a certain neoliberal economic philosophy. There was one moment when Clinton says she wants to support strong growth, fair growth, and sustained growth. She wants broad-based, inclusive growth. A kind of economism was at the heart of her imagining, right, of our current state of affairs and how she would intervene, right? So no real fundamental challenge to the frame. And one of the things that we heard, a glaring absence in the debate, was any mention of the working poor, any mention of poverty, any mention of working people, right? We want to lift the middle class rhetoric we've heard for a long time. So on the one hand, we want to say very clearly that I think the choice is stark. Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running a campaign, let's call it a campaign of a scoundrel. And to the extent to which we can call it that, when he acts like a scoundrel, there's no surprise because he's running a campaign of a scoundrel, right? So he can be attractive as such, and you can call it a scoundrel account or however we want to. But what's interesting about Hillary Clinton is that she put forward a set of positions, particularly around NAFTA. She doubled down on it. She said there were some problems with it. In some ways, she doubled down. She said there were some unintended consequences around the position around the war on drugs, around the expansion of the carceral state under the Clinton administration, right?
She weakened on TPP.
Right. She weakened on. So what we saw very clearly is well, let me say it this way. I don't know at what moment did she appeal to the progressive left in the debate. Now, it's clear that those of us who are reasonable and rational creatures saw the distinction between Donald Trump, who some moments looked like a lunatic, other moments came unhinged, other moments the neo-fascist, other moments an adolescent. But I don't know, there was no moment where I saw her trying to appeal to the progressives who supported Bernie or the millennials or even African-American voters.
Let's go to their discussion about stop and frisk, beginning with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
We have to bring back law and order. Now, whether or not in a place like Chicago you do stop and frisk, which worked very well, Mayor Giuliani is here, it worked very well in New York, it brought the crime rate way down. But you take the gun away from criminals that shouldn't be having it. We have gangs roaming the street, and in many cases, they're illegally here, illegal immigrants, and they have guns, and they shoot people. And we have to be very strong, and we have to be very vigilant. We have to know what we're doing. Right now, our police, in many cases, are afraid to do anything. We have to protect our inner cities because African-American communities are being decimated by crime.
Your two minutes expired, but I do want to follow up. Stop and frisk was ruled unconstitutional in New York because it largely singled out black and Hispanic young men.
No, you're wrong. It went before a judge who was a very against police judge. It was taken away from her, and our new mayor, refused to go forward with the case. They would have won an appeal. If you look at it throughout the country, there are many places
the
where
argument is that it's a form of racial profiling.
No, the argument is that we have to take the guns away from these people that have them and that are bad people.
Stop and frisk was found to be unconstitutional, and in part because it was ineffective. It did not do what it needed to do. Now, I believe in community policing, and in fact, violent crime is 1/2 of what it was in 1991. Property crime is down 40%. We just don't want to see it creep back up. We've had 25 years of very good cooperation, but there were some problems, some unintended consequences. Too many young African-American and Latino men ended up in jail for nonviolent offenses, and it's just a fact that if you're a young African-American man and you do the same thing as a young white man, you are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated. So we've got to address the systemic racism in our criminal justice system.
Professor Eddie Glaude, unintended consequences.
It's just a gross misunderstatement. When we think about the kind of expansion of the carceral state under the Bill Clinton's administration, when you think about over the 1 million plus black and brown people who are currently locked up, at the same time you got all these black people in the big house while you have a black person in the White House. It seems to me that this is precisely what's wrong with Hillary Clinton's outreach to the black community, that she won't speak forcefully about the state of policing in this country. Not only crack cocaine disparities, but the way in which communities are policed. It's more than just simply community policing. It's more than simply better police training. It has something to do with decriminalization, misdemeanor decriminalization. It has something to do with stop criminalizing poverty. It has something to do with getting rid of bail for all but violent crimes, decreasing the amount of citizen-police contact, which produces these situations and scenarios where folks are losing their lives. So here she doesn't speak passionately, right? And what we get as well, we get this false equivalence. Why can't Hillary Clinton in this moment? And again, Donald Trump is clearly someone that's problematic. We don't want, focusing on Clinton is not to say that Donald Trump is the choice. But why can't Hillary Clinton just speak to the circumstances of how black communities are policed? Why is it that she has to say, on the one hand, here, and then on the other hand, we have to help police do their jobs? What is the point of making that kind of move, of balancing the two conversations simultaneously? It's because she's not talking to black communities at that moment. She's still talking to the median white voter that she thinks she has to appeal to.
And Arlene?
Yes. Curiously, she's not appealing to poor whites either. I listened to her from the point of view of, a blue-collar white guy, and he wouldn't feel heard either. Are you a part of the basket of deplorables? She didn't reach out, to that group either.
Ramzi Kassem, this whole issue of stop and frisk, that Donald Trump wants to extend it to the whole country, and he said that's not true, that a judge ruled that it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not satisfied with both sides of the debate on this issue. I mean, with Hillary, when she talks about restoring trust, she assumes that trust was there to begin with between poor African-American communities and the police. And frankly, that's just historically blind. She's glossing over the realities of those communities for generations and their relationship with local police forces. And when she talks about unintended consequences in one breath, which seems to minimize the breadth of the problem plaguing this country when it comes to race relations and when it comes to police-community relations, and then a few seconds later, she talks about systemic racism, I think that sends too mixed a message. It's not clear exactly what her position is on these issues. And then when you pivot to Trump, I mean, there's no surprise that Trump is always going to be order over justice. But when he says that, we have to bring back law and order, and you sort of contrast that with the reality that Obama's presidency, empirically speaking, has been safer by most commonly accepted indicators than the Clinton presidency, than George W. Bush's presidency. That really highlights the extent to which Trump is peddling this myth of a crime wave with no empirical support whatsoever. It's just fact-free populism. And when he goes on about stop and frisk, it's more of that same fact-free populism. So he goes on national television and he says that there was no finding of unconstitutionality when the opinion is very clear in that regard. But when it comes to stop and frisk, I mean, I think, again, look at New York City, right? Stop and frisk was diminished and then suspended in significant respects. It still exists, but not in the way that it existed under Giuliani, under Commissioner Kelly. The sky has not come crashing down. Crime rates have not soared. But more importantly, look at other cities that have never had stop and frisk. At the same time as crime rates were dropping in New York City, crime rates in those cities were dropping as well, which gives the lie to this notion that somehow stop and frisk is what brought crime down.
And we're talking about how many people, young, Latino, Black, mainly men, some young women, arrested. Not arrested, stopped and frisked. More often than not, I think more than 90% of the time, not actually charged with a crime.
Exactly. The cost of stop and frisk in New York City and in other cities that have deployed a similar policy is borne almost exclusively by poor Black and Latino communities.
And it's, at this point, it's not a dog whistle, it's a foghorn. Because what he's doing at that moment, he's talking about the devastation of Black communities, trading on a host of stereotypes that circulate in the common conversation about the state of urban cities, and then and expressing concern, and then immediately following that description, trading in those stereotypes, appealing to law and order, appealing to the policy of stop and frisk.
He's stoking fear.
Of course, he's not talking to black people.
And the fear, in turn, ramps up the police violence. Because there's this doctrine that's been adopted by U.S. police forces over the past 20, 30 years, which is very pernicious, very dangerous. And the doctrine says that if you feel you're under threat, just subjectively feel you're under threat, then you can shoot to kill. Now, when you have a society where there's white racism to begin with, and whites will start off by feeling more fear when facing a black than facing a white in the same situation, you have that. Then you have someone like Trump coming along and amping it up even further. Then this doctrine gets extended to the kind of laws for the civilians that enabled George Zimmerman to roam the streets with a gun and open fire legally if he felt threatened because he happened to see a young black man walking.
Communities, I know. Imagine communities around the country who are overly surveilled and underprotected, hearing that the Fraternal Order of Police, over 350,000 cops, have endorsed Trump. Someone who has, in effect, is very explicit that he's not committed to due process, that he's not committed to the rights of everyday ordinary people.
We have to bring Isabel Garcia into this conversation. You may not be in our sight right here in New York City, but you're not out of our heart. In that last clip that we just heard, Isabel, there was not much discussion of immigration. But in that last clip, you have Donald Trump saying we have gangs roaming the street, and in many cases they're illegally here, illegal immigrants, and they have guns and they shoot people, and we have to be very strong and we have to be very vigilant. We have to be, we had to know what we're doing. Right now, our police, in many cases, are afraid to do anything. Can you respond to this from the border there in Tucson?
Absolutely. I knew that he would have to make a comment like that, which is based on falsehoods. All the studies that have been done, all the credible studies, document the exact opposite, that it is a lower rate of criminality in the undocumented population versus the native population, right? So right away he's stoking that fear, but I want to address this whole issue of racism, and I have to say that it's not just blaming Clinton and the Democrats or the Republicans. I think we have to blame ourselves, our community, obviously. You know, I feel a part of the community, and we have allowed Trump to gain traction. A lot of good people never wanted to talk about Trump. They didn't want to talk about underlying issues. You have a congressperson who recently said, oh, those blacks are protesting because they're jealous of us, because we have to face that. We have to face the fact that we've done a terrible job in this country of teaching our history. And of course, it's the first step in any reparation. And I believe that Secretary Clinton should have talked about that. Not only reform within the criminal justice system itself and what it means to, be discriminated against from the very moment, but what about those communities that are devastated? What about Detroit? And what about communities where youth have no jobs and no economic opportunities? Those are fundamental to any of these discussions, and I believe that in a large part we're to blame. We're obviously Clinton is not the ideal candidate, and we have to stop Trump. But beyond stopping Trump, we must build a movement that is focused on human rights, that is focused on economic rights, on cultural and racial rights. And we must hopefully win out of here to continue to press our community, because it's our communities that have to press these politicians to do the right thing. We know that it's really bottom up if we want to, not top down.
I wanted to go right now for a minute. We just spent an hour and a half inside Hofstra University hearing this debate between the two major party candidates. But there was a lot of action outside as well, and you're not going to get much of this in the corporate media. But our colleagues, Hani Massoud and Dina Guzder, were there at Hofstra, and this is what they found outside as they were following the third-party candidate, Jill Stein, who was escorted off the premises by both Hofstra security and the Nassau County Police.
That's right.
Tonight is a turning point. We can no longer go forward into the future and allow ourselves to be silenced, to be intimidated, and to have our political power ripped from us. So we say it's time to reject the lesser evil and to fight for the greater good. And we will go forward, knowing that we do have the power to create an America and a world that works for all of us. And the power to create that world is not just in our hopes, it's not just in our dreams. Right here and now, outside the barred gates of Hofstra University, that power is in our hands.
Let her in! Let her in! Let her in! Let her in!
Jill, it's Democracy Now! We just want to get at this. What happened today? What happened today? This is Democracy Now! What happened today?
So today we were invited to speak to the media, and we had several interviews. We were at Fox, we were at CBS, and we were on our way to an MSNBC interview because the students were so excited about our presence. They attracted the attention of security, and we were escorted off of the campus.
We're going to go inside, and I'm going to ask if they will open the debates, all right? We have a right.
We have a right
to participate. In nonviolent civil disobedience.
Currently, right now, you're blocking traffic, allowing people to come in and out of the parking lot. We're asking you to please move to the sidewalk.
And we're going to wait for them to bring us somebody from the Commission on Presidential Debates. Have a seat.
My name is Carlos Jesus Calzadilla, and right now we're demanding Jill Stein to get into debates because this is supposed to be a democracy, and we're supposed to have dialogue amongst many people, not just two. And the Commission on Debates is controlled by the Republicans and the Democrats. We are demanding right now, in America, where supposedly we have freedom of speech, to open the debates and let Jill Stein and Gary Johnson participate in them.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are obstructing vehicular traffic. If you refuse to move, you are subject to arrest.
Bennett Weiss. We're blocking the road because we want an open debate. They want an open road, which will affect a few handful of vehicles. We want an open debate that will affect the entire world. We either move or we get arrested. I'm prepared to get arrested.
You turn around, please.
Can you narrate what's happening, Sherry Huntwood?
I'm going to jail for trying to make sure that I'm having handcuffs put on right now and going to jail because I believe everybody should be a part of the presidential debate.
My name is Robin Laverne Wilson. I am the Green Party candidate for Senator of New York State, and I'm here because this is what my ancestors did for me to have the right to vote, and the access to the ballot and the debates is just as important as access to the polls.
What's your name?
My name's Heather Graham, and I'm here with Occupy the Debates so that everyone in the American people have a right, thank you, the American people have a right to know who they can vote for. We have a right.
What's your name? Who are you with?
I'm Yana Indigo. I'm a surrogate of Jill Stein.
What's happening right now?
I'm being handcuffed because I'm standing up for all of our children, including your children, including the children of these men who are arresting me.
Turn around and walk this way, please, miss. Thank you.
My name is Carol Cutler.
What's happening right now?
I'm getting the bracelets.
Why do you feel so strongly you're willing to get arrested?
Well, because everything else has failed, so some people have to stand up and say we're not taking this anymore.
Yeah, Bernadine Zenny.
And what's happening right now?
Well, I'm being arrested.
Why?
Well, because they say we're blocking, but the traffic's already blocked. They're blocking the traffic. We're just sitting down in the road.
Why are you sitting in the road?
Well, because we're here for Jill Stein. We want her to get on the debates. We think we're just doing this so Chris Hedges says the last thing we have is our bodies. So I'm putting my body.
Special thanks to Democracy Now's Dina Guzder and Hani Massoud for that report outside Hofstra. It looks like about 24 people got arrested. They were led by the former vice presidential Green Party candidate, Sherry Hunkala. Jill Stein and her running mate today, Ajamu Baraka, did not get arrested, and Jill Stein will be in our studio tomorrow morning to expand the debate. She will have a podium here at Democracy Now! We will play excerpts of the debate, and after Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are asked to respond to Lester Holt's question, we will stop the tape and have Jill Stein respond. We had invited Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, but he's not participating this time. We'll be doing this for all the debates. But I did want to bring in Kshama Swant, who is in the Seattle studio, about the involvement of third-party candidates. And I wanted to ask you, we had a discussion before you came on in the pre-debate segment about whether you feel in swing states people should vote for, well, you're supporting Jill Stein, across the board, or do you think there should be strategic voting?
When Socialist Alternative and I launched Movement for Bernie, through which we supported Bernie Sanders' campaign until the Democratic Party establishment made sure that he was eliminated from the race, what we said was that we understand that if people want to make sure that Trump is not elected by using a safe state strategy, or in other ways to call it a swing state strategy, we totally understand. And I think that while talking about that, we have to open up our discussion on the left to the larger and more fundamentally and important and long-lasting question of how are we going to build the left as an alternative to both the corporate politics of the Democratic Party and the hateful right-wing bigoted agenda of Trump. And as some of your guests have stated, we're not only worried about Trump and what he himself can, the kind of havoc he can wreak if he was to be elected president, but the kind of currency, the kind of echo it would give to the real right-wing elements in America at a time, ironically, when the vast majority of working people, and especially young people, millennials, are moving well to the left, and they have made it clear which direction they're moving by the enormous historic support that Bernie Sanders got. And I'm really glad that you, as an alternative to corporate media, are bringing in the voice of Jill Stein, because all the people who spoke, the ones who are getting arrested because force is being used against them, because they are demanding a fair voice in the debate, all of this is showing that it's really a question of mass movements. I mean, we talked about stop and frisk. We talked about how horrifying it is that the Fraternal Order of Police supported Trump. But at the end of the day, who is showing the leadership on the question of racial profiling by the police? Who is showing the leadership and questioning police violence? It is not the Democratic Party establishment. It's certainly not the Republican establishment, but it is young people on the ground. It's the Black Lives Matter movement that took off really in a big way after what happened in Ferguson, that is calling America's attention on the brutal violence unleashed against black and brown people, especially young people, who called out inequality in America. It was the Occupy movement. And as far as third-party candidates are concerned, Amy, I think we can't talk about that without also talking about what happened in Seattle, because we are often told, presidential elections are off limits. We can't talk about third-party politics there because we have to play it safe. Let's do local. Well, look at what happens in local races. I won the election as a socialist because I did not run in the Democratic Party establishment. If I had run as a Democrat, as Bernie did, I would have been defeated, because the Democratic Party establishment, while it definitely wants to defeat the right-wing agenda, I believe that they want to defeat Trump, their bigger priority is to defeat a working people's agenda. And we also have to make sure that our mass movements, while not given an artificial pause in the election year, we also make sure the direction that we're going in. And I should mention, some of the biggest movements that are arising, surprisingly in a presidential year, is through the Stop Dakota Access Pipeline. It is a historic protest, a historic movement where tens of thousands of tribal leaders and tribal members have gone. This is the largest collection of tribal movement against the pipeline, and we are seeing young people and grassroots people showing leadership on this. And what have we seen from the Democratic Party? It was not Hillary Clinton who went there at the risk of being arrested. It was Jill Stein who went there, and it was ordinary people who went there. And that is the kind of leadership we're talking about. But that is only possible if mass movements not only energize themselves independent of the Democratic and Republican establishments, but also understand that giving an artificial stop or a pause to our movements in presidential years, because we're not supposed to talk about this, and buying into the logic of lesser evilism, which I know is uppermost in the minds of many of your listeners, what we see through history is that by that logic of lesser evilism, there will never be a good time to build the left. And I would argue exactly the opposite, that there has never been as good a time as today to really ferociously, with determination, build the left as an alternative to both the Republicans and the Democrats. Because you only have to look at what people are saying around us.
I want to say, just in the number of people who are tweeting and writing on Facebook, there is a tremendous concern about what's happening in North Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline. And we just learned that in this last few days that the standoff that we filmed on Labor Day weekend, where Native Americans went to an area where the Dakota Access Pipeline was excavating, that property that they were protesting has just been sold directly to the Dakota Access Pipeline. But Alan Nairn, you wanted to weigh in on this issue of movements as we begin to wrap up this discussion. We have just under 5 minutes.
Yeah. You have to attack the corporate powers, the rich and the mass murderers, both from within the Democratic Party, which may be possible to take over. I wouldn't have thought that before, but Sanders' success suggests that might be possible, and also from without simultaneously. But if at this moment you let Trump into the White House, if you let Trump slip in by voting third party in a swing state, and therefore by a handful of votes hand that state to Trump, you could be rolling things back by decades. You put you flip the switch, which up to now has blocked the Paul Ryan Koch brothers agenda from passing through the Congress, because Trump will be there to support it. You put new Scalias on the court as a new majority to set that agenda in stone. Parenthetically, Trump said in the debates that he did not want to cut Social Security, but there are all sorts of reports that when he privately met Paul Ryan, he promised Ryan that he would cut Social Security. But the council member made a very important point about how fundamentally there's every reason to think we're entering an era where fundamental progressive change is possible. Why? Because the working and middle classes have collapsed. And that has to reverberate. There's no way it won't. And the rise this year simultaneously of Trump and Sanders indicating that that those waves are finally reaching the shore. So there's really kind of for the medium term and the long term, there's tremendous opportunity. But if you let the white supremacists, the neo-fascists sneak in, this can set back the entire clock, not to mention costing the lives of additional millions of people. As we mentioned before, whether it's Clinton, whether it's Trump, the U.S. policy of supporting mass murder overseas will win, because they both support that. But it's partially a question of how many murders. With Trump, you get both the continuation of the killing bureaucracy that Clinton comes out of, but you also get the added element of the Cheney, Rumsfeld, Curtis LeMay style gambling and recklessness. Trump came out and demanded that the Chinese disappear Kim Jong-un, the nuclear-armed dictator of North Korea. Trump is calling for sending more U.S. forces off the coast of China to confront the Chinese military on the issue of the South China Sea. Trump has talked about nuclear weapons for Saudi Arabia and Japan and South Korea. We're talking about even more death with a Trump. And maybe most uniquely, we're talking about unleashing the beast in white America if Trump is handed this victory.
Ramzi Kassim, as we wrap up, you have the last comment right now.
Well, I mean, I think the Supreme Court does hang in the balance. The next president is going to nominate not just Scalia's replacement after he passed away, but potentially 3 additional Supreme Court justices. Now, that's 4 justices, given the fact that Justice Ginsburg might retire, Justice Breyer might retire, Justice Kennedy might retire. 4 justices. The last president who's done that in their first term is President Nixon. And so that will shape the American jurisprudence for a generation to come, if not 2, depending on how young those nominated justices are. And that is important to a number of issues in our country, ranging from abortion to